Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about everything I was able to read in July. I am a little low energy today, but we have so many books to talk about, and I'm actually really excited to be talking about some of these books with you today. Really quickly, I always break up my videos by category / genre so you can jump around as you see fit. And I always start with the books that I reread, and I go through these rather quickly. So, these are all the books I read to help me fall asleep. The first set of books is the Song of the Lioness Quartet by Tamara Pierce, which includes Alana the First Adventure, In the Hands of the Goddess, The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, and Lioness Rampant. Now, these are childhood favorites of mine that I believe hold up to the test of time, and I absolutely adore this young adult fantasy series, and nothing makes me fall asleep faster than listening to these books, just because I've read them so many times and they just help me relax. Then we have another fave, Red, White, and Royal Blue. This book just brings me so much. It's nostalgic at this point as well. It just hit me at the right time. This book found me when I needed it, and whenever I reread it and revisit it, it brings me back to that time and just brings me a lot of peace and comfort. And this is also 5 out of 5 stars. I love this alternate history rom-com. It's so great. And the last reread I have is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, which is a new favorite of mine. This book recently came out, I believe, in February of this year, and it has quickly become a comfort read for me. And I listened to this on audio this time instead of physically reading, and the audio experience was just as lovely as physically reading this. This is about Viv, who is an orc barbarian who decides to retire and open a coffee shop. And it's incredibly lovely, and I think more people should read it. I have a full review for this book up on my channel if you would like my full thoughts and feelings and gushing review for this book as well. The next book I'm going to be talking about in the next category is romance. I read one contemporary romance this month, and that was Chef's Kiss by TJ Alexander. This is about Simone, who is a very high-strung, very task-oriented, very uptight pastry chef, and she works as a recipe writer and test baker at this popular magazine, and she is asked to create YouTube content, and she's very uncomfortable with this. Ray is the new kitchen manager for the magazine, and the two of them end up having to work together to produce YouTube content, and they go viral, and it's a really big deal. They're making the company quite a bit of money doing this. And Ray comes out as non-binary throughout the course of the novel to her coworkers with very mixed results. I will say this is a romance, so a big chunk of the story is focusing on the relationship developing between Simone and Ray, but this is a fairly heavy topic of exploration of gender and being out in the workforce and in your job, and what that means and what that looks like and how nasty it can get. There's some pretty heavy misgendering in this book, so it was really disgusting. So what was some of the things that were being said about Ray and to Ray, and even to Simone, who is bisexual, some pretty nasty things are said to her as well. So that, for me, is what was a little bit of a setback. I gave this book 4 stars. I did really enjoy it, but this is not a fun rom-com, if you know what I mean. This is a romance novel, but it's not it has some comedic elements, but I think the overall tone of this book is a little bit more serious, and it really delves into this topic very deeply. It does have a happy ending, and things all work out for the best, just like any romance, but do be warned going into this one. I did really like it, and I do recommend it if this is the type of romance you are looking for. The next category is all the comic books, graphic novels, manga I was able to read this month, and it's a lot, and I really apologize. So the first one, probably my least favorite, but I pretty much enjoyed all of these, was Heavy Vinyl by Carly Ousden. I ended up giving this 3 stars. This is a little comic series about this teenage girl who ends up working at a record store in the 90s in New Jersey, I believe. And everyone is gay who works at the store. It's an all women run store, and the other staff and the manager or the owner of the record store is hiding a secret that the main character gets invited into. So I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was one thing, and then it took a really interesting turn with that plot twist, which didn't really work for me. So I gave this 3 stars. This does read very young, very YA, which is again is fine, and I was expecting that, but the plot twist just didn't work for me. And obviously I don't want to spoil it, but go into this knowing that it's not just some young girls and women, queer people hanging out in a record store. There's a little bit more to it than that. It goes kind of left field for me. Then we have Attack on Titan. I read volume 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All those volumes of Attack on Titan. And I won't talk about each one individually. The first 8 volumes go into our season 1 of the show, if you've seen it, and then volume 9 is when season 2 of the show starts. So I read up to 8, and I had only ever seen the first season, so I kind of was already familiar with the story. So I'd say overall the first 8 volumes I gave like a 4, maybe 3 stars per volume, just because I already knew what was going to happen, and I actually enjoyed the anime a little bit better. But volume 9 I gave 5 stars. Because it surprised me. I didn't know what was going to happen. It really kicks off with a bang, and I really enjoyed it. So if you are interested in horror manga, I think I'm like the vibe this whole series is giving me is like a 3.5, 4 stars. It's really solid, but the anime is also fantastic. So pick your poison with that one, but I had a good time reading these 7 volumes. And we have A Sign of Affection by Yu Morishita, and I read the first 3 volumes of this, and this is about a college student, a young woman who is deaf, and she's going to college, and she meets this hot guy on campus, and he's really cool. He likes to travel the world on his breaks, and he works at a bar, and she thinks he's really cute, and he wants to learn sign language from her and get to know her, and they form this little romance. It's just like a little romance manga with our main character being deaf, and I thought this was really sweet. I liked the portrayal of the signs in the book, how that was done. There's possibly a love triangle happening with an old childhood friend, which I am not afraid to admit. I enjoy a good love triangle if it's executed well, so I'm excited about it. And yeah, this was just fun and cute and sweet, and I gave all 3 volumes 5 stars. Because I just thought it was so precious. It was so precious and fun, and I wish my library had more. I think there are 6 or 7 volumes out, and we only have the first 3, so I wish I could continue. And then last manga is A Man and His Cat by Umi Sakurai, and I only read the first volume of this, and this is about this cat who's kind of big and fat and kind of ugly cute, and no one at the pet store wants to adopt him. And one day this old guy walks in and said, "That's my cat," and he adopts this bigger cat, and it's just the 2 of them growing to love each other and do cat and human things, and it's a really cute. I cried because of how cute this was. It's just like a little slice of life about this cat and this man forming a bond, and I wept. This is a 5 stars. This was amazing. If you want something just super wholesome, A Man and His Cat. This was great, and I want to continue very, very badly. Next category is fantasy, and really quickly I will talk about the Bone Orchard and Lachlan's. Bone Orchard by Sarah A. Mueller, Lachlan's by Robert Jackson Bennett. Both of these books I quite enjoyed, and I have full reviews up for these on my channel if you'd like to check those out. Bone Orchard I ended up giving like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Fantasy standalone, quite good. And then Lachlan's I gave 5 stars. Great ending to a trilogy if you are into this series. I was able to continue the Baru Cormorant series by Seth Dickinson with The Tyrant Baru Cormorant, which is the 3rd book in this quartet. And this book was so good. This was a return to some of the ideas and themes and execution of book 1. And the reason I love book 1 so much is because Baru Cormorant is such a intelligent political player in that book. She's scheming and conniving. We see on page her politically maneuvering very, very intelligently, and then in the background, something else will happen. She's like, well, I prepared for that too. So it's just so smart. And then book 2, she is a little bit more reactive. She's just kind of dealing with things that are being thrown at her. And she's not able to kind of take control of the plot. Like, she was not the driving force of the plot. The plot kept happening to her. But in book 3, we go back to Baru being in control and maneuvering herself and others. Obviously, there are still things that can't be predicted, that she has to deal with, you know, situations that are out of her control. But we get more of her politically maneuvering, and the end of this book is quite something. We start to see some of the payoff of her long game. She's trying to overthrow the empire, and the end is in sight. It's getting really quite exciting at this point. And if you are into dark fantasy, I highly recommend this series. Watch out for the trigger warnings on this. Eugenics, homophobia, violence. There's so many. So just, again, be careful with this. But I think it's so well done and executed, and Baru is fighting against those things every step of the way. So if this is something that you're interested in, I highly recommend this series. Just be careful. And I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. This was so good. The last fantasy book I was able to accomplish was The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is the start of the Dandelion Dynasty Quartet. And I was originally introduced to Ken Liu via a short story, and that was a sci-fi story, and I absolutely loved not only his writing, but the execution of that story. It was so mind-boggling. So I wanted to get into his long-form storytelling. And so I started with The Grace of Kings, which won the Hugo and the Nebula, and it is a huge award-winning novel. And I really was surprised by this. I mean, going into it, I had all these expectations, and I knew certain things, and it was a fantasy with like Chinese history inspiration. It's called a silk punk fantasy. I have never heard of this term before, and I'm really excited I got introduced to this subgenre. This is about essentially 2 men who are on opposing sides of a rebellion. So they are both rebelling against an emperor and an empire, and they're on opposite sides. And at first they're best friends, and then they have such different values and methodologies that they end up splintering apart and becoming rivals and enemies. And this was good with caveats. So I was reading this book, and at first it's very confusing because there are so many points of view, which is typically not something I enjoy. And at first I wasn't even sure who our main characters were. But I just decided to trust the book and to see where it would take me, and boy does it pay off in the end. So if you just let the book happen and just keep going with it, I really think the payoff is quite worth it. So even though you kind of know how it's going to end, I knew exactly where it was going, the narrative arc of the story, I was still very emotionally impacted by the end of this book. And I actually shed a few tears at the end, just because of how beautiful the execution of that story arc was. So this is a great epic fantasy story. Just know about the points of view going into it, in my opinion, but I will be continuing, and I'm having a great time with this series. So I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then we have A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. I don't know if you can tell, but I love Becky Chambers quite a bit, and this is Becky Chambers' newest novella in her Monk and Robot series. This is about sibling Dex, who is a non-binary T-monk who is kind of losing focus and getting burnt out on life, and is trying to find kind of a renewed vigor for their job, you know, serving people tea and listening to their problems. So they decide to go on a little bit of a journey, and they end up running into a robot, and this robot's named Moscap, and it's about them going on this little adventure together, and Dex kind of learning some things about themselves. And this was the second book in the series, and it was just as delightful as the first one. I think the reason I gave this like 4 stars instead of 5 stars is because the conflict, or like the character arc of Dex, is very similar to book 1. Like, I understand characters don't just have an upward trajectory. There's back and forth, and there's things that they improve, and then they step, you know, 1 step forward, 2 steps back sometimes. But it just felt very similar to their conflict in the first book. But there are also some anti-robot sentiments in this book, which I think is kind of an allusion to, you know, people just being bigots, and that's not fun to read. But it's a small part of this book. There's only, you know, 1 scene where that kind of happens. But yeah, this was overall quite a delight, and I had a good time reading this, and I gave, again, this 4 stars. I'm gonna say it, this was my favorite book I read this month. And that was Velocity Weapon by Megan E. O'Keefe. I actually listened to this audiobook, but I own a physical copy of it as well, which just goes to show how much I enjoyed this. So this is a wild sci-fi story about these 2 siblings named Sonda and Biren Grieve, and they are separated by time. Sonda goes to war, and she's hit by something, and she wakes up in an escape pod, and 200 some odd years have passed, and she's trying to figure out how to get back to civilization, if she can reverse this time period thing, and get back to her brother and her 2 dads, which I love. And then this is also following Biren, her brother, who is dealing with a lot of like the political fallout of what happened, as these 2 planets are kind of at war with each other over technology and amongst other things. This features an AI ship that has its own personality, which is one of my favorite tropes, which is probably why I liked this so much. But this also has that interesting and lovely sibling dynamic. Sonda is a bisexual. She makes a comment about how she was in a relationship with a woman in the past, and how she's attracted to a man in the present, and there's maybe a romance happening there. It's not a focus at all in this book. And this was just fast-paced, and there was some plot twists in here that I thought were quite a bit of fun. I flew through this. I literally read this in 1 sitting. I'm not even joking. I listened to it at 2 times speed, and I just sat for like 7 hours. I'm really not feeling well, so that makes sense, but that just goes to show just how engrossed I was in the story. There are some elements of other points of view that do sneak in, and you don't really understand how they fit in with the main story that's going on. But as I'm reading book 2 now, it's starting to make sense of how these other narratives are pulling into the main story. So keep that in mind going in, but this was a lot of fun. And if you like political stories, if you like science fiction, epic sci-fi, I highly recommend Velocity Weapon. Really quickly, I just feel like to close off this video, I want to try something a little bit different and just talk about what I'm currently reading. Just for fun, just because, you know, keeping you guys updated on what's going on with me. So the first book I'm going to talk about really quickly is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I've been reading this for 2 months, and it's not because I don't enjoy it. I'm actually really enjoying this story. I'm about 215 pages in. I'm really loving this, but it's just these trade paperbacks are hard on my hands. So I'm just reading this slowly and really enjoying the lyrical writing in this one. I'm also reading Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey, one of my favorite authors. So I read this again in like bursts because it's a physical book. Having a little bit of a hard time with it, but I am 182 pages in, and this is a horror novel. And so I also need to read this in daylight because I get freaked out. I mentioned this before, but I am reading Chaos Vector, which is book 2 in this series, which is called The Protectorate. Look, it's got the series number on the spine, which is unheard of. And so, yeah, I'm listening to this. I'm about 20% in, and I'm enjoying it just as much as book 1. Things are heating up, and it's getting very exciting again. I am also listening to The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu, which is the second book in the Dandelion Dynasty, following the Grace of Kings. I barely started this, to be honest, but it's following the children. I won't say whose children, but it's following the dynasty, if that makes sense. So like the first book was following the main characters, and now we're following the children, and I'm assuming the third book is going to be their children, because we're following this whole dynasty, this whole family throughout generations, I'm assuming. But what I have read of this, this is great, having a good time. I'm obviously reading lots of things right now, so that is, you know, I'll get to it, I'll get back to it. I like to switch off between a few things at once, obviously. That's not for everyone, but it works for me. So that is what I'm currently reading, and that is what I have read in the month of July. Thank you so much for watching, if you stuck around to the end of this video, and I will see you in another one very soon. Bye.